Look, man, the battles that you fight on a daily basis, behind closed doors, the battles that you fight in private, the battles that you fight in the dark, eventually they show up in public. They eventually show up in your everyday life. Like your life on the outside, your life, in public is kind of a direct reflection of what's happening in private. The things you're working on in private, the things you might be dealing with in private, like those battles and then those moments and those times, maybe even the struggles, they show up in public outcomes. People see the results, people see what you put out, people see what you've been working on, but they don't see the direct battles that go on behind closed doors. They don't see what you fight and what you go through, you know, in private. You know what I'm saying? And your discipline, your mindset, your faith, like they're all built when nobody's watching. Those things are all built behind closed doors. Those things are all built, in private. And if you're losing that battle, behind the closed doors, if you're losing that battle in the dark, like it'll eventually leak into your public life. It'll eventually leak into the things you do on a daily basis, how you show up, what you act on, your process, your journey. Like those battles in private are eventually going to make its way to the public part of you. You know what I'm saying? To the thing that you show, to the results that you show. You know what I'm saying? And what you avoid in the private, what you avoid behind the closed doors is what controls you publicly. Like those habits you might run from, those habits you might hide from, the thoughts that you might ignore, the wounds that you don't want to heal, the temptations that you might be battling and fighting, the routines that you want to get away from, man, but you keep running from them. All the things that you avoid privately, they don't just disappear because, you're pushing that thing down and you're trying to compartmentalize it. You know what I'm saying? I know me personally, I'm a person that, I feel like I do this very well is compartmentalize a lot of things, whatever I might be going through or whatever I might be working on, like only I know about that. You know what I'm saying? I kind of push that feeling aside or push that thing aside so I can show up and just be okay all the time, be fine all the time. You know what I'm saying? But as we go through life, like we can't always push these things away. You know what I'm saying? We gotta work on these things in private, because eventually they're going to show up as stress. They're going to show up as inconsistency. They're going to show up as burnout, anger, self-doubt, self-sabotage, anxiety, like all these things that we run from in private that we're not working on, that we're not healing, are going to show up in our everyday life. You know what I'm saying? And I say all that to say, like, we got to spend time working on ourselves even when we feel like we don't need it. I know specifically in this realm, as men, we like to put on this facade that we're tough all the time and that, nothing bothers us and we're always fine, we're always okay. But deep down inside, we know that, we're fighting a lot of things, we're battling a lot of things. But when we don't actually look at these things and work on them, bro, like they start to spill over into our public life. It gets to a point where we can't hide that anymore. You know what I'm saying? It gets to a point where we can't just put on this facade in this front like we're okay all the time. Like those things eventually spill out into what we do every single day. So before those things spill out, before these things show and, show up in our public life, like we got to work on these things. You know what I'm saying? We got to spend time working on these things because what you don't confront in private, behind the closed doors in silence, like it's going to end up confronting you in public. Like I said, that anger is going to come out. One day you're just going to lash out. One day you're just going to self-sabotage something or that self-doubt is going to start to creep in. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of things that we run from are eventually going to show up. So in private, like we got to work on these things. But I always say, like, you got to work on you and help you and be there for you before you can be there for anybody else. You got to pour into you before you can pour into anybody else. Or eventually you're going to be pouring from an empty cup. You know what I'm saying? And this is the same thing. Like, you got to work on you in private. You know what I'm saying? You got to work on the things that you might be battling on a daily basis before you can focus on anything else or anybody else. You know what I'm saying? And that private discipline, that private work ethic is eventually going to create public peace. You know what I'm saying? Like when you win in private, when you work in private, when you grind and you win these battles in private, whether it be waking up early, whether it be praying, whether it be staying consistent and doing these things when people aren't watching, like your life is going to start to align. Your life is going to start to trend in the right direction. You know what I'm saying? Your journey is going to get easier. The process is going to get easier because that private obedience is going to lead to public, success, public confidence, public, discipline. Like people are going to see that. They're going to see that maybe your mindset has started to change, or maybe the way you carry yourself has started to change. People are going to see that you become more locked in, you become more mature. You know what I'm saying? Like, prime example, I don't know if y'all, keep up with this, but there's a streamer named Casanat, man, and he recently took a break from streaming, a break from the internet and all that, and he recently came back and spoke on mental health and spoke on the different things that he's been going through, and everybody around was like, wow, he's gotten more mature. You know what I'm saying? He's gotten more locked in. He's gotten more, confident in himself, or he came with, a different like aura, I guess you can say, about himself. You know what I'm saying? And nobody knew this, that he was going through these things, and nobody knew that he was working on himself and becoming a better version of himself, because he did it in private. And what he's done in private has now showed up in public. Those results have showed up. So just take him as an example of work on yourself in private, and don't let those problems that you might be going through, or these things that you might be battling, spill out before they're healed or before they're fixed. You know what I'm saying? Before you've worked on these things, and just work on yourself privately. You know what I'm saying? Like, not everybody has to know what you're going through at that moment. Not everybody has to know what you're working on at that moment. Like, they can see the results for themselves. You know what I'm saying? They can see the work you've put in and what you've done with their own two eyes. You don't got to always speak about it and, boast about it all the time. You know what I'm saying? And just keep things private, because God sees what nobody else sees. God sees the work that you put in on a private basis every day. He sees the private time you spend with him. He sees the private work that you're putting in for yourself. You know what I'm saying? And he honors what's done in secret. In Matthew 6:6, it says, what is done in secret will be rewarded. And that's true. Like, what you do privately and what you don't really speak about all the time, those things that you're working on will be rewarded in the public. That those results are going to start to show and speak for themselves. You know what I'm saying? So I say all this to say, like, start winning the battles that no one is, seeing. Start winning the private battles, because your peace, your purpose, your goals, your future self, like all these things depend on winning the battles in private, winning the battles behind closed doors. Winning private, and your public life will start to change for the better. It will start to trend in the right direction. You know what I'm saying? You're going to start to take steps forward, and everybody's going to start to see that. You know what I'm saying? And just win the private battles, bro, because you matter. You know what I'm saying? Your mental health matters, your physical health, spiritual, whatever. Like, all those things matter. But you got to take it, upon yourself, and take the responsibility to work on those things. You know what I'm saying? To work on yourself, to work on your mental health, or to work on the things that, nobody else might see. You know what I'm saying? So start winning those battles, and let those battles and those wins spill over into the public. But that'll be all for this video, man. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you like this video, go hit that sub button. We're on the way to 700 subs. I appreciate y'all. I love y'all. I will see y'all in the next one.